Yes, good morning. Myself, Dr. Sudhanshu. I am going to discuss a business communication. What is communication? The communication which we use in a corporate world, in a business organization. Firstly, we will discuss about the communication. What do we mean by the communication? Actually, the communication word that is derived from the Latin word that is a communicare. The communicare means to share or just to inform. Communication is defined as the process of understanding and sharing the meanings. Actually, there is a process of communication. There are certain components are required for the full communication process, like a message, sender, encoding, channel, decoding, receiver and the feedback. So, for the communication there are the two components are basically required, the sender and the receiver. The sender is a person who sends the message and the receiver is the person who receives the message. The sender must have a message. The message will be encoded by the sender and through the channel, and the channel may be of different kind, like a electronic channel or the face to face or like a hoardings, wordings, or there are so many types of channel which we can use for the just transforming the ideas from the one person to the other person. And the receiver receive the message and decode the message, and after decoding the message the receiver sends again the message to the sender through the feedback. So, that is why the feedback, that is a very much important component in a communication process. Now, back to the point. There are so many different authors, they have given the different definitions. The most popular definition, that is the imparting or exchanging of information by speaking, writing or using some other mediums, or the successful conveying or sharing of ideas and the feelings. Actually, the communication is of two types: the verbal communication or the non-verbal communication, we will discuss later. There are some other definitions of the communication, like communication is a process that involves sending and receiving messages through the verbal and non-verbal methods. If we ask the types of communication, if we use the word the forms of communication, then it will be a formal and informal. But when we talk about the types of communication, then it will be a non-verbal and the verbal communication. So, we come to the next slide, the types of communication. Here we have written the types, but actually this is the form of communication, because sometimes we confuse when we use the word. These are the two types, the formal and informal, and in the next again there in slide again we have written the types of communication, then again it is a verbal and non-verbal. So, in this type of communication basically it is a forms of communication, the formal and the informal. The formal means the communication is exchanging the official information between two or more persons within the same organization by following the predefined rules. It means if we are working in any organization, then we will have to follow the certain rules or the certain instructions. If we follow the certain instructions within the organizations, then it will be a formal communication. The formal communication, because in any organization there is a hierarchy in an organization. Hierarchy means the organization, the top on the organization, there will be a CEO. Below the CEO, there will be a vice president, general manager, regional managers, branch manager, assistant manager, supervisors, and the junior staff. There are the number of hierarchy in a business organization. Before discussing about the formal communication, we must know about the hierarchy and the dimensions of communication. Do you have any idea about the dimensions of communication? Yes, dimensions of communication, they are the vertical, horizontal, and the diagonal. There are the three dimensions: the vertical, horizontal, and the diagonal. Vertical again divided into two parts, that's a upward or downward. So when we talk about the hierarchy of the organization, if we just convey the masses from the top to bottom, then the communication will be called as a downward communication. When the masses is flow from the junior to senior, then it will be called as a upward communication. So in a formal type of communication, downward and upward, we follow the certain instructions, like the firstly, if the masses is sending from the assistant manager to CEO, then the person cannot convey the masses directly to the CEO. The firstly, the person will convey the masses, or the assistant manager, just for example, the assistant manager will convey the masses to the branch manager, then the branch manager to the regional manager to general manager to vice president, and the vice president to CEO. You cannot directly send the masses to CEO. If you directly sending the message to the CEO, then it won't be called as a formal communication. So you are not following the proper instructions or the predefined rules in an organization. It means you are following the informal communication. You don't follow the formal type of communication. So in this formal type of communication, whether it's a upward or the downward, the same way, if the CEO has to convey the certain masses, any important masses to their workers, but he will send the masses to the GM, to the vice president, then vice president to GM, GM to regional manager, to branch manager, and then to assistant manager. It may be by the verbal part. Verbal means by the oral section or by using the written communication. Now come to the next point, that is the informal communication. Informal communication that generally follow when you don't follow the predefined rules. Informal communication is also called grapevine. That is a technical word which we use in a business communication, that is a grapevine. The grapevine is also a informal communication. So informal communication in a communication dimensions, in a diagonal type of communication will be always a informal communication. The diagonal means there might be a different departments in an organization, like planning department, travel department, accounts department, operation department, production department. If the one person of any department, like the branch manager of the production department, is conveying the message to the branch manager of the accounts department, then it will be a horizontal communication, it will be a formal communication. But when the branch manager of the planning department is conveying the message to the regional manager of the production or the accounts department, then it will be a informal communication, that it is a diagonal. The diagonal means the one department of the any position is conveying the message to the other department at a different position, then it will be a diagonal communication and it will be a informal type of communication. So there are the two forms, the formal and the informal communication. Now the informal communication I have discussed, that's it is also called the grapevine. Grapevine, they are the various chains in grapevine. There are the four chains of grapevine. That's a single strand, gossips. First is a single strand chain, second is a gossip chain, third is a probability chain, and the fourth one is a cluster chain. Single strand means from one person to another person. Probability, then the one person to another person but the topic are not related. Gossip chain, when the one person to the other person but the person is adding some more material in an actual message, that is why it is called gossip. The message is not correct, they are just discussing or they are just adding the material in an actual message which is not relevant, but they are conveying to the other person, that is why it is called the gossip. And the fourth type of chain, that is the cluster chain. The cluster, but when the one person is conveying the message to the group of other, to the group of next persons, then it will be called as a cluster. Cluster means the bunches. The one person like A, Mr. A is conveying the message to the B, C and D. Message is same, but the person is conveying the same message to the three person. Then again these three person are conveying the same message to the next three, like a B to next three person, C to next three person and D to next three person. By this way you can see in a very short span of time the message will be sent in a very fastly mode, from the one person to the thousands of persons, to the lakhs of persons, and you can see that this example in a social media. In a social media, within a very short span of time, the masses can be viral. Within a minute, within an hour, within a day, the masses will be circulate to the maximum numbers of the public through the social media. So this is a informal communication. This is just through by informal communication. So that's why we can say there are the certain merits and demerits of the formal and informal communication. If we will have to send the message very fastly, then we must use the informal communication rather than a formal communication. But when we are talking about the business communication, or you can say the office communication, or you can say the in-house communication. So in a in-house communication or the office communication, we cannot use the maximum time the informal communication, because there are the so many other merits and demerits of the formal and informal communication. In the formal communication, if you are sending a message again from branch manager to CEO, then if there will be an informal communication, then the channel wise the person will not be aware about the message, like what message you are sending to the CEO. If the CEO will ask by the like a general manager, ki what was the matter, and you will say, sir, I am not aware about this matter, then there will be some, it will put a negative impression on the CEO, ki how the assistant manager they can send the message directly to me, but you have followed the informal communication. So you are just thinking कि I'll have to send the message very quickly, but in this quickly part you have forgotten the channel between you and the CEO. So in a business organization or in a organization world, so you'll most of the time you'll have to follow the formal communication. So these are the types or the forms of communication: formal and informal. Dimensions of communication: upward, downward, horizontal and diagonal. And in this informal communication there are the 4 chains of grapevine, because the informal communication is also called grapevine. So there are the 4 types, 4 chains of grapevine: single strand, probability, gossips and a cluster chain. समझ में आया आप लोग को? Okay, good. So this is all about the forms of communication. Now the next, after the forms of communication, there is a types of communication. That is a very important topic, types, because most of the time we use the various modes of communication, whether we are sending the masses through the words, through in writing, or through by using a certain symbols. So here we will discuss about the types of communication. There are basically 2 types of communication. Number 1, that's the verbal communication, and second one, this is a non-verbal communication. Do you have any idea about the verbal communication? What is verbal communication? Yes, the verbal communication is of 2 types. Again, the verbal is of 2 types. Number 1, that's the oral communication. The same, like at present I am delivering a message at this classroom and you are just receiving my message through my words. This is a verbal, or you can say this is a oral communication. When we write something at we have using one page and we have written some points and I have delivered this material to our students, then it will be a written communication. Sometimes the person are confused when we ask the written communication is a verbal communication or non-verbal communication, then most of the time person said कि written communication is a non-verbal communication. No, the written communication is a type of verbal communication. The one part is a oral and the other part is a written communication. So verbal communication is any communication that use words to share information with others. We are using the words, whether it's a oral or written. These words may be both spoken or written. हम आपसे orally बात कर रहे हैं कि हम written way में बात कर रहे हैं. These are the 2 way, the oral and the written, or you can say the spoken or in words. These are the part of the verbal communication. Now the second type of communication, this is a non-verbal communication. The non-verbal communication, here we have written the communication includes the facial expressions, the tones, the pitch of the voice, gesture displayed through the body language and the physical distance between the communicators. Here you can see the words in a non-verbal, but you can write down that basically there are the 3 types of non-verbal communication. You will ask, what are the 3 types? Actually here I have written all the 3 types in this portion, the non-verbal communication including the facial expressions, pitch, gestures, body language, physical distance. But actually they are the three types of non-verbal communication includes kinesics, proxemics and the paralinguistic. Now, what is kinesics? What is proxemics? And what about the paralinguistic? Kinesics. Kinesics is a study of body language. Proxemics, that's a study of time and space. And the paralanguage or the paralinguistic, that's a study of paralanguages. Now, what is body language? Study of body language. Study of body language includes gestures, postures, eye contact, facial expressions. These are all the parts comes under the category of the body language. How I walk, about how the hand movements, leg movements, my facial expressions, my eye contact. Sometimes I maintain eye contact with our audience or with our students. The eye contact or the eye contact, this is a language. हम लोग आई के साथ भी आपसे बात कर सकते हैं, अपना मैसेज जो आई कांटेक्ट होता है उससे भी हम अपना मैसेज आप तक फ्लो कर सकते हैं, आप तक भेज सकते हैं. द सेम विद द जेस्चर्स एंड पोस्चर. These all are the types of the non-verbal communication. Basically, in the category of the body language, we generally send our message to the next person. Now, the proxemics. What is proxemics? Proxemics is a study of time and space. Do you know the space represents a certain message? There are the 4 types of spaces which we generally follow in a speaking world. Number 1, that's a intimate space. Number 2, that's a personal space. Number 3, that's a social space. And the 4th one is a public space. Now, with this space, the next person or the person who is not present at here, if suppose I am delivering a message, you are an actual receiver, but if the third person, if he or she enters in a room, the person can understand very easily the who is the instructor and the who are the spectators or the receivers. How they can understand? They can understand by just seeing the distance between the two persons, because there is a social distance. I belongs to the teaching community, you belongs to the student community, and there is a difference between you and me just by using the distance between you and me, between the students and the teacher. So, this is a distance of social type of distance. The personal distance between you all, amongst you, you are friend circle, you are in friend circle, you are friends. Then in a friends there will be a personal distance. Like a family members, there will be a intimate distance, and the distance between me as an speaker and the general public, that is a public distance. So, there are the 4 types of distance: intimate distance, personal distance, social distance and a public distance. Now, channels of communication. Initially, we have discussed about the process of communication. In this process, will be a various components in a process like a sender, encoding, channel, decoding, receiver and the feedback. Sender sends the message through the channel to the receiver, and the receiver receives the message, and after receive the message he sends the same message to the sender, who is now acting as a receiver. This is the revert part, is also called the feedback. That's why we say communication is a two-way communication. It is not a one-way. If there will be a one-way communication, it won't be effective. If there will be a two-way communication, it will be a highly effective types of communication. So here we are discussing about the channels of communication. The what type of channel we generally use in sending the message from the sender to the receiver. This is the electronic form of channel. Sometimes we use the video conferencing, through telephone, through certain documents, through the mail, through the chat or the message in your mobile, and through the mail like a Gmail or the email. Here we have mentioned the electronic forms of channel which we use for conveying the message from the sender to the receiver. Otherwise, there are so many other channels. The other channels like a face-to-face, maybe through the hoardings, boards, neon boards, magazines, televisions, radio. There are so many other channels which we can use for making our communication effective. But actually, we must keep in our mind at which situation we are sending a message to the other person. Then according to the situation, we must use the appropriate channel for communication. If suppose I am here and I am just delivering the message to you, if here if you say a video conferencing is most effective, why we are not using the video conferencing at here? Because the video conferencing, it is not appropriate at this time. So this time I will use the face to face, or you can say the air communication. ये हम लोग यहाँ पे face to face communication use कर रहे हैं. It is a more effective rather than the video conferencing or the telephone or the through the mail. There is no use of such type of channel in this situation. That's why you must be aware about the effective channels for the communication. So now, if we have discussed about the types of communication, forms of communication and the process of communication. Now the question is, if there is no free flow of communication between the sender and the receiver, then what will happen? Of course, the barriers will be created between the sender and the receiver, because there is no free flow of communication between the sender and the receiver. There are the certain hurdles, or there are the certain obstacles between the sender and receiver. That's why not free flow of communication between the sender and the receiver. Now these are the various types of barriers. Actually, some authors, they have mentioned the barriers of communication like semantic barrier, psychological barrier, physical barrier, cultural barriers. But here we have mentioned some more important part of the barriers which comes in a broad category of the physical, psychological, cultural and the semantic barrier. Number one, that is a linguistic barrier. The linguistic barrier that is related with the language. Suppose I am speaking in English and some of you cannot understand English, or if I am speaking in Hindi and some of you cannot understand Hindi. So there is a language problem between you and me. Actually, I will have to make our communication very effective. How can I make communication effective without using the proper language? Suppose I am using English, you cannot understand English. So, there is a not free, because you cannot understand English just because of the language which we are using at this time. So, that is the barrier related with the linguistic barrier. The same way, the other types of barriers we will discuss in a next class, but here in a brief we will tell you about these barriers, like a psychological, the problem that is related with the psychology, like we can give the example like a premature assumptions. Suppose I am here, I am taking a class in this institute, I am taking a class of MBA or the BBA. They are the one is a undergraduate course, other one is a PG or the postgraduate course. I am thinking कि I am taking a business communication class in MBA, and I am thinking that the person we should start from the level 2, not from the level 1, because the person is in PG class, the person will be knowing about the ABC of the business communication, but sometime I may be not in a clear situation कि person को अगर हम level 2 से पढ़ा रहे हैं, मैं ये सोच रहा हूँ कि person जानता होगा कि इसका ABC इसका basic क्या है, but I may be in a halo effect, the premature assumption. मैं शायद हो सकता है मैं गलत सोच रहा हूँ कि मैं लेवल 2 से पढ़ाऊँ और लेवल 1 इनको आता हो, तो इसका क्या इफेक्ट पड़ेगा कि हम जो जिस लेवल पे आपको पढ़ा रहे हैं आपको वो चीज़ समझ में ना आए, जस्ट बिकॉज ऑफ द प्रीमैच्योर assumption फ्रॉम माई साइड. That is a psychological barrier. The emotional barrier. The emotional barriers, sometimes the persons are very emotional in their behavior, in their nature, and emotion wise the problems or the hurdles or the obstacles may be created between the sender and the receiver. So, by today we have discussed about these barriers of communication like linguistic, psychological and emotional. Rest barriers we will discuss in a next class, but if you have any question related with the topic which we have covered earlier, like types of communication, process of communication or forms of communication, then you may ask very quickly without any hesitation.
So can you tell me about importance of feedback?
Importance of feedback, right? That's a feedback, that's a very important component in a process of communication. I've already told you there are the two types of communication. Number one, that is a one-way communication, message sending from sender to the receiver. When the receiver receives the message and he gives the response to the sender, then it will be called as a feedback. The communication, the main feature of communication, the main importance of communication is just to inform. If there you are informing, sender is informing to the receiver, but if the person is not receiving the response of the receiver, there will be no effective communication between the sender and the receiver. So, feedback, that is a very important part in a communication process. So, thanks very much. That's all for today. In the next class, we will discuss about the barriers to communication, the other types of barriers and the broad categories of the communication barriers. Thank you very much.